Now, I've already covered Dusk Till Dawn in my Subliminal Spells video, but The Dark Night of the Soul is, as I said, split into two phases. Well, so is Dusk Till Dawn the movie. Dusk Till Dawn is essentially two acts. The first half is a heist movie with no supernatural elements whatsoever, and the second half is a vampire movie. The film just switches from one to the other. It took a lot of people by surprise when it first came out, but the two halves of the film are synonymous with the two phases of the Dark Night of the Soul. The first half represents the purification of the senses, so the outer psyche, and this is why it doesn't feature anything supernatural. The outer psyche is our conscious mind, the parts of ourselves that are visible to ourselves and to others. The second half of the movie represents the purification of the spirit, which is the inner psyche, the shadow. This is why the tone of the film completely changes. Basically, the character of Seth, aka Set, has to face his shadow. And no, the vampires are not the shadow. I'll get to them in a bit. He has to face his shadow because he is the sun setting and going on a journey into the underworld. His shadow is his brother Richie. Richie is psychotic, delusional, and sociopathic. Seth, on the other hand, is the ego. The ego likes to think that it's in control, but when you don't face the shadow controls the ego, without the ego consciously realising it. Seth, at a first glance, seems to be calling the shots, but Richie's out of control behaviour keeps getting him in all kinds of trouble, so Seth is not in as much control as he thinks he is. In the second half of the movie, Richie is the first to be killed by the vampires. When Richie turns into a vampire, Seth is finally forced to confront him as the monster that he is and put him out of his misery. He finally confronts his shadow. And before killing him, he says, "Richie, here is the peace in death that I could not give you in life." His killing of Richie represents the reintegration of the shadow. The purification of the spirit is, as I said, a time when one is forced to burn bridges with the world and lose friends and family that are inhibiting your spiritual growth. The peace in death is the renewed balance or equilibrium when the ego and the shadow reunite. Another character that experiences the dark night of the soul is Jacob. Jacob was a preacher, but he had a crisis in faith when his wife died, so he lost his faith. He still believed in God, but he didn't like God. Now, a crisis in faith is exactly what St. John of the Cross described as his own dark night of the soul. So it is clearly the theme of the film, at least in a subtextual sense. Jacob regains his faith when confronted by true evil in the form of the vampires. Now, what do the vampires represent? Exactly what I said they represented in Aquildor, the Antichrist spirit. Those who don't confront their psychological demons are the most at risk of possession from real demons. Being of this world and not integrating the shadow, in essence means that you are possessed by your own shadow. It calls the shots without you realising it. So you being a temple governed by a shadow attracts the Antichrist spirit. An unclean psyche attracts unclean spirits. If you can't secure your own house, it's an open invitation for intruders to come in. Vampires in the Titty Twister is Antichrist consciousness in the temple. Now, the only remaining survivors at the end are Seth and Kate. They manage to hold the vampires off until dawn, and then the sun comes up and they shoot some holes in the door, letting the rays of light come into the building. Well, rays of light are the Holy Spirit. When they finally escape, the rays of light hit a disco ball in the centre of the ceiling, which reflects all around the room, killing all the vampires. In other words, the Holy Spirit enters the heart and all the demons are exorcised. Now, the word disco comes from a French word, discothèque. It means record library. Now, as I earlier revealed, the word record or record comes from the word cordis, meaning the heart. So the disco ball is the heart. The two phases or the two halves of the film are bookended by the theme song of the movie, which really is the ultimate confirmation because the name of the song is Dark Knight. Now it really doesn't get much clearer than that. The interlude between the two halves of the movie is marked by the performance by Tito Tarantula of the song After Dark. The term After Dark is one of those paradoxical sayings that actually means after light. On the scale of the day, the two phases of the Dark Night of the Soul are the 6 hours of evening and the 6 hours of night. So the two sixes. After dark in this case refers to the end of the evening and the beginning of the night. So 12 o'clock. 12 being 3 in numerology, that's 636. The current of the 9. Now this film being about the Dark Night of the Soul and containing the theme of bats, it's no coincidence that George Clooney would go on to play Batman, aka the Dark Knight. Now of course this was before the Dark Knight franchise, but Batman is nonetheless synchronistically the Dark Knight. Now to add to the syncs, the movie which Clooney played Batman in was directed by Joel Schumacher, who also directed The Lost Boys, featuring Kiefer Sutherland as the vampire David. Returning to Dusk Till Dawn, you will recall that the Dark Night of the Soul is synonymous with the 12th trump or arcana, which is the Hanged Man. So, can we find any symbolic reflection of the Hanged Man? Well, the answer is yes. Dusk Till Dawn spawned 2 sequels. Now, one is called Texas Blood Money, and it centres around a bank job. And remember that banks, temples and pigs are all synonymous. But the third is called The Hangman's Daughter. And hanging is of course a central theme for the first half of the movie. So there's your Hanged Man symbolism. So what about the Dark Knight himself? Well, Batman manifests the 2 phases of the Dark Night of the Soul with his dual identity. Bruce Wayne is the outer psyche and Batman is the inner psyche, the shadow. Now in Batman Begins you have the Scarecrow, which is a famous Jungian archetype for the shadow. And in The Dark Knight we have the Joker. Well, the Joker represents the Fool in tarot. And of course it wouldn't be the Dark Knight without the Hanged Man, as the Joker hangs upside down, mimicking the Hanged Man tarot, even down to the smile on his face. Hanging is once again a theme in The Dark Knight. Now it didn't end there for Heath Ledger and the Hanged Man symbolism, as there is a scene in his last film before his untimely death, The Imaginarium of Dr. Parnassus, which I might add is replete with checkered Stargate symbolism. But there's a scene in which he is hanging with a pyramid symbol on his forehead. So there's no shortage of Hanged Man references in The Dark Knight. At one point, Harvey Dent gives a speech and he says, quote, "The night is darkest just before the dawn," unquote. Which is another nod towards the true archetypal meaning of the film. The Joker is not just the Fool though. He is, as he tells Harvey Dent, an agent of chaos. He represents the Discordian energy. He's a vessel of the Antichrist spirit. And just like the Antichrist spirit, he seeks to make others in his own image, to make them like he is, which he succeeds in doing to Harvey Dent. Throughout the film, the Joker tries to convince Batman that underneath it all, deep down, Batman and everyone else are all just like he is. This is exactly what the Antichrist spirit wants everyone to think. Charles Manson says exactly the same type of thing. He often has said that he is the reflection of each and every one of us, that when we look at him, we are looking at ourselves. One pertinent quote of Manson's is, quote, "Look down at me, you see a fool. Look up at me, you see a god. Look straight at me, you see yourself," unquote. There are reoccurring patterns to the way the Antichrist spirit operates, and the whole "you're just like me" line of reasoning is one of them. Now the confirmation of the Joker's demonic nature comes in the perhaps unexpected form of an appearance in the film The Exorcist Part 3. In The Exorcist Part 3, which is the true sequel, I might add, to the original Exorcist film, a scene is shown inside a church where a statue of a saint inexplicably morphs into the Joker. There's no reason for that scene that fits the narrative of the movie, and yet it is there. Why? Well, because demons get you in the abyss, which is the dark night of the soul. Scorpio and Sagittarius, the Hanged Man. The Hanged Man also makes an appearance in this film, shown here in this scene, plain as day, in about as over a fashion as you can get. Now, whoever slipped the Joker and the Hanged Man in there knew exactly what they were doing. Demons get you in the abyss with a false, counterfeit version of illumination, which is, in truth, possession. Those who are fooled are those that mistake the darkness for the light. The fool is both the beginning and the end in tarot, the Alpha and the Omega. Therefore, it is synonymous with Christ. However, it's also synonymous with the Antichrist, because the Antichrist uses the exact same symbology as Christ, hence the Joker being the fool, aka the demonic Antichrist spirit. Evil tricks you because the trickster, the jester, the Joker fools you into empathizing with it, becoming its reflection, its image. Just like Charles Manson said, look straight at me, you see yourself. Don't let the Joker fool you into believing that you are him and he is you, because mark my words, he will try. The Joker, which is to say the Antichrist spirit, uses your own pain, your own emotional scars against you. It tricks you, presenting itself with scars that match your own scars, to fool you into identifying with it, to empathizing with it. It presents itself with a scarred face to mirror your own scars. You want to know how I got these scars? And of course, the reason is always different. A lie to make you think like it thinks, to carve you in its image, just like the Joker makes Harvey Dent in his image. He tells Dent that planning gets you nowhere, when really he has planned everything. It's organised chaos that he uses, and he does so to make people see things upside down, just as he does, because the Hanged Man is upside down. So evil comes as the scar face, the anti-hero, to win you over. It wants good people to do bad things, and it pulls them into the grey, morally ambiguous area in order to achieve this, telling them that white is black and black is white. Now, it's no coincidence that this poster is black and white. This is how the Antichrist spirit gets you. The symbolism reveals it because under spiritual law, it must tell you what it's doing. Again, it gets you in the abyss where the darkness is the light. The abyss is Scorpio, hence the dualistic imagery on the cover of Kenneth Anger's satanic propaganda piece, Scorpio Rising. Scorpio is, in point of fact, a sign of duality, as I will later reveal in much more detail. You either rise out of the dark night of the soul at one with the black, or at one with the white, Christ or Antichrist. Now, as you will soon see, Scorpio is historically associated with both scorpions and snakes. In Luke chapter 10, verse 19, Christ says, quote, "Behold, I have given you authority to trample on snakes and scorpions, and to overcome all the power of the enemy. Nothing will harm you." Unquote. He's talking about demons. If you're in the image of Christ, the white as opposed to the black, you will have authority over the demons, and you won't fall for their tricks. So when you rise out of the dark night, you will know the darkness from the light, and you won't be deceived. So, Scorpio rising is to rise out of the dark night. Scarface amounts to the same thing. Montana, as in Tony Montana, means mountain. To mount means to rise up, to ascend, at one with black or white, Christ or Antichrist. And that's why Tony rises up through the criminal underworld. Underworld being the key word. In other words, the abyss. Then you have Hannah Montana, another good girl gone bad, white to black. The duality emphasised in the infamous VMA performance with Robin Thicke. And Robin, of course, relates back to Batman, The Dark Knight Rising. Well, we all know which side Miley emerged from, and it wasn't the white. Who owns my heart? Well, I think that's obvious at this stage, and she is dressed in black to answer that question. Now, the letter M, if you remember, relates to the water. Scorpio is a water sign. Moreover, the Antichrist consciousness melts your heart, taking you from frozen to water. The universal ocean of Antichrist consciousness. So, Scorpio rising is the Dark Knight rising. As for the water, the lower beastly chakras are led in alchemy and associated with the planet Saturn, which is to say the cube. And in sublimation, they are interchangeable with ice. Thus, they can be thought of as an ice cube. Now, the top three chakras are spirit, or vapour in sublimation. So the centre, or the heart, which is the throne of Christ, is therefore water. Water at 33 degrees. The throne, or the heart, sits on the ice and underneath the vapour. Now, the name Isis literally means throne. Hence, Isis on the cube, bringing forth her fruit. 7/4 just means the 7 chakras are 6 around a 7. The 7 is Isis in the centre, the heart, but she is also the 4th chakra from either side, top or bottom 3 chakras. So she is both the 7 and the 4. When the cube grows a fractal, the 6 around a 7 becomes 12 around a 13. So the 7 effectively yields a 13. Isis brings forth her fruit in the centre. Given that the fruit is interchangeable with water in sublimation, and the symbol for water is M, you could say that it's M in the centre of the infinitely unfolding time cube. Mary time. Maritime. I mentioned Robin earlier, and how Robin Thicke played a part in Miley's occult rebirth. Well, that's because Robins are a symbol of the red rays of the dawning sun. That's why the Dark Knight is accompanied by Robin. Robin's name is Dick Grayson. Dick, as in phallic, the ray of light, or the positive to Batman's negative. So Seth, in Dusk Till Dawn, and his brother, Richie, aka Richard, abbreviated Dick, are foreshadowing Clooney's later role as Batman in Batman and Robin. Robin in that film was played by Chris O'Donnell, who also starred in Vertical Limit, alongside Robin Tunney, which was about climbing the K2 mountain. So back to mountains, aka Montanas again. Jake Cotsey actually has several videos about the K2, its relation to the Giza Pyramid, and Robins. Nonetheless, Miley Cyrus sticking her tongue out has been connected to the goddess Kali, and rightly so, as Kali is time. So she is the time cube. She is also deaf, which makes her the 4th chakra, the heart, aka 7/4. Anyway, getting back to Batman. In The Dark Knight Rises, Bane is the villain, and he leads a movement with Occupy Wall Street type undertones. You could call it Occupy Gotham. But what really is Gotham though? Could it be Golgotha, the place where Jesus was supposed to have been crucified, meaning the place of the skull? Well, I'd say it is, considering Batman's father or great-grandfather was supposed to have founded the Skull and Bones Secret Society in the comics. So Occupy Gotham would be code for Occupy the place of the skull. Now the skull and the rose both refer to the 0 point, the point in the centre, Christ. And Golgotha was said to have been located just outside the walls of Jerusalem. So in that sense, there is a connection between Gotham and Wall Street. The Occupy movement used the symbol of the woman on the ball, which is just Isis on the cube, and are heavily associated with Anonymous, who like to use the slogan of the biblical demon Legion. We are Legion. Now, as far as The Dark Knight Rises goes, It's worth mentioning that the Dark Knight shooting, as it has been touted, occurred in Aurora, which is the name of the goddess of dawn, and we all know that it's darkest just before the dawn. So, the shadow is very much a legitimate part of ourselves, and integrating it is necessary to keep the true darkness out, that darkness being the Antichrist spirit. We know that darkness can be thought of as 24, because it is the reverse of the rainbow, and we also know that it's synonymous with vampires, in just about every way imaginable, casting no reflection because it can only receive. Its vessels in our world would be the Kenites, the Tares, the psychopaths. The nest of the Kenites was the city of Tyre, aka the Rock. Now Tyre was a maritime trade city, full of merchants, so the maritime system of today is nothing new. It's the way of the Kenites, the way of the Antichrist spirit. I might also add that Tyre is the origin of the Tyrian purple. Now I did mention this at an earlier stage, but I'll do so now because the Joker wears purple, adding to the signs of his Antichrist nature. Now I think it's about time that we decode the Kenite infiltration of the 12 tribes of Israel and try to get to the bottom of all this.